Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 8th of February 2021, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by David Scott, bringing us northern exposure from north of the border. We just got there, I think.
I think we did. Right, well, we're going to get started with this BBC article. Why are care home residents still dying with COVID? This is what the BBC's asking. And of course, they're not giving any answers. But what they do is provide some statistics in the form of a graph. Here it is. This is care home deaths in Scotland's second wave of COVID-19. And they've well, they've put the dotted line on there, which shows when the vaccination programme for care homes began. Brian, this looks quite similar to the England and Wales situation that we've already highlighted on this programme. If you remember this graph showing also the dotted red line there, showing when the first vaccines were delivered. That was a few days before they started appearing in care homes specifically. But nonetheless, the pink line is the 7-day rolling average, and you can see that the rolling average is quite a bit steeper post the beginning of the vaccination programme as to prior. So what's going on? Well, David Scott has asked this question on Twitter, and people are in fact asking Nicola Sturgeon to respond to your original question, David.
Yes, no response yet. So Nicola Sturgeon was tweeting out a celebration that 48,165 vaccinations in Scotland yesterday, a record high, 99% exclamation mark of older care home residents now vaccinated with the first dose. So she's celebrating. My question was, why has the death rate gone up since the vaccination programme started?
And in fact, this graph that you've provided actually shows it quite more starkly.
Yes, I mean, gone up's putting it mildly. This graph's from the National Records of Scotland, and what this shows is there was an abrupt increase, and if you look solely at the 85 plus age group, it doubled. The death rate doubled from around 100 a week to around 200 a week, just after the vaccinations were introduced, and I think we should be told why.
This is a very good point. Now, of course, correlation doesn't mean causation. We've got to say that. But nonetheless, the correlation continues to appear in the mainstream press. Here's the BBC again. 10 people dead after COVID outbreak in 5 care homes. So another care home. And this isn't just in the UK. So this is from a couple of weeks ago. All Toronto long-term care home residents and staff have had their first dose of COVID-19, says CTV News. And then not long afterwards, we got this type of report from Canada saying 66 residents have died at long-term care homes. So the same types of headlines appearing in other countries as well. But Brian, coming back to the UK then, we've got Bristol Live, and inside the care home in Bristol where residents were vaccinated well before COVID-19 outbreak.
Yes, telling headline there, Mike, but I picked on this particular story because there is quite a story in this article. So let's just pull it apart a bit. So the headline as it stands from Bristol Live, then this is one of the key statements. Managers and staff at a Bristol care home have described how they did everything they could to keep coronavirus out, only for it to arrive just 2 weeks ago. Their valiant efforts to keep the virus at bay for 11 months until a sudden outbreak in the home in the 3rd week of January after all the residents had been vaccinated. So let's just look at a little bit of detail here. This is one of the key parts of the articles where there's a graph, and they're talking about what was described as the Brislington spike, the 3rd highest case rate in the country on the 1st of February 2021, and this caused a huge furore in this particular area where they were, if you can see in the little inset graph, it's a little bit difficult, but there's a blue line transferring into a red line on your right, and they're right at the top of that. So the spike was disaster and suffering everywhere. So this was part of the quote. In the week up to January the 26th, the government reported that the number of new cases in Brislington had jumped from 26 to 74 in the space of a week. So this was all the hype about how they were in a really bad situation, and these cases were just leaping off the paper. So we get a bit more here. Give you another quote. Bristol Live asked Bristol City Council and its public health team for more information about the reasons for the spike. A week later, no response, and questions to the Director of Public Health remain unanswered. So the government starts screaming that there's a major increase in outbreaks in this area. This ramps up the fear in the local area. But when the journalists from Bristol Live ask the key question, what's the reason for this? What happens? No response. So take in a little bit more. On Wednesday, however, in an apparent bid to reassure local residents, Brislington's local councillors announced publicly on the area's community social media pages that the outbreak was attributable to a couple of care homes in the area. But the only care home in the area is actually Arbour Walk, which the paper correctly identified. So what we see here is the councillors, the local councillors, attempting to push the blame for the outbreak onto the single care home in the area. So what we've got is a complete story being spun, not by the newspaper. The newspapers is reporting the facts correctly, but there is a story being spun about COVID. So in jumps Joss Clark, who's the Lib Dem councillor for Brislington, but she's also the mayor for Bristol. She's quoted in this article as, many of you may have seen in the media that we have a spike in numbers of cases in Brislington West. I have been in contact with the Director of Public Health today, and I'm going to have a briefing tomorrow. At a councillor briefing this evening, I was told that the spike in cases has been identified and it is associated with a couple of care homes in the area. Well, of course, this was instantly false because the paper says there's only one care home. But now this terrible spike, which is frightening all of the community, is pinned onto this single care home. I will be asking for information about what measures the care homes will be taking to ensure the safety of the residents and staff, and how they're working with the people who are currently infected. What will be done to vaccinate the residents to ensure their safety in the future?
But they've already been vaccinated?
But they've already been vaccinated, but the paper says it couldn't find out exactly when the vaccinations had taken place, but they had been vaccinated. I'm sure we will all wish those people who are suffering at the moment a steady and safe recovery, and that their families and friends will be able to continue to have contact with their loved ones. Now, this is what the nursing home or the care home replied, and I've got a lot of sympathy with the team because they were really having to fight their corner. They say not all that increase can be attributed to the outbreak at Arbour Walk, and the spread in the community outside the enclosed walls is also a factor. Throughout the pandemic, the home remained COVID-19 free until 2 weeks ago. In order to prevent any outbreak and to keep our residents safe, all our staff undertook robust infection prevention control training, which was continuously reinforced through auditing, spot checks and refresher training. So there we have, there is a team of care workers doing their very best to protect the patients, and they're being successful. Then what happens? All of our residents in Arbour Walk were vaccinated with their first dose well before the outbreak occurred. And the lady goes on to say, despite the new strain of COVID-19 being 70% more infectious than its predecessor, our infection control protocols mean that we have contained the virus to only one of our wings in Arbour Walk. Now, I asked you about that 70% figure. Mike, where would this lady have got this very precise 70% figure? And you pointed me to Dr. Eric Volz from Imperial College, but actually he was pointing to a spread of probabilities on that infection.
He was, and so it's a spread of probabilities, but the 70% figure was then taken from Eric Volz, used by Boris Johnson, and so then it became fact after that.
Yeah, so now we can see how uncertain statistics arising at Imperial College, or indeed the government or Public Health England, suddenly become precise facts when they've spread through to the care homes themselves. Well, the article also reported Pfizer and AstraZeneca. It said the makers of both Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines, say their jabs take a few weeks to build up immunity, and that may be longer for older people. So the most vulnerable people, Mike, you get a jab, that puts you at risk, but then you're at additional risk because your immune system is suppressed, and that might go on for a longer time because you're elderly anyway.
But this care home, according to the owner or the person that was quoted by the newspaper, hasn't had any infections in the entire period until the vaccines were delivered.
The vaccines, precisely.
Right.
Precisely. Now, we want to say that we've been contacted by another whistleblower who is specifically talking about what's been happening in care homes. We're going to play this clip out now, and we're also going to do more on the full clip after the news itself. But let's hear what this whistleblower had to say. Contacted me and given me some really interesting information about what you're seeing in the care system with regard to vaccinations for COVID-19. What are you able to tell us?
Well, my experience has been over this past year or so that the social care system has responded incredibly vigorously to all of the regulations and guidance that have come from the government. People have been fully on board with it, even to the point of being rather zealous about it. Haven't been part of that culture and felt that it's not been easy to express any questions about it. Probably this is the same in many other areas, but the reason why I'm saying that is because on the whole, for those who are in management positions in social care, there's a very strong pro-vaccine and pro-government narrative agenda. So what I've been coming across in the last few weeks in particular needs to be spoken about.
Okay, so vaccines have now come in some quantity into the care home system. What's been the result of the vaccination policy?
Well, from the reports that I'm seeing from my colleagues, the vaccines are very often accompanied by outbreaks. So I've seen quite a few colleagues reporting that they've been free from any illness over 12 months, and then the vaccines come in, and then an outbreak results. And these, as I say, are people who were very enthusiastically banging the drum for the vaccines a few weeks ago, congratulating each other on how many staff they'd got on board. And now there's a kind of very different story emerging.
Right. And are you able to say, to share with us where you're actually seeing that information?
For example, on groups for registered managers, so CQC registered managers, who it's mediated by the Care Quality Commission. Registered managers will share with one another in a kind of professional forum, and just recently begun seeing posts where they talk about how they're having to deal with outbreaks now, having previously been free from them, and many, when one person will comment, many others will say, well, it's the same here, I've experienced the same thing. For some of them, it's, three-quarters of the workforce suddenly becoming positive, which is extraordinary, and residents being affected as well. So
the background is that care homes have run a very careful, protective policy for their residents, and that's worked very well. So there's been a low. Correct me if I've got this wrong, but there has been a low incidence of COVID, and then the vaccine's coming in, and then something's changing. Is that what you're describing?
Yes, that is the picture. Of course, it's different provisions. These are maybe care homes, they may be day settings, they may be settings for vulnerable people. and obviously the care homes where elderly residents will have most likely been affected in some way throughout. But now that the vaccine rollout is moving across the whole generality of provision for people in need of social care, we're seeing settings which previously had been managing fine are reporting these very dramatic increases in cases, either cases or actual outbreaks.
Do we actually know which of the vaccines has been administered? Is there a difference resulting from which particular vaccine's been used?
Well, that's not been reported to me. I expect one could follow that up, but the one which I've heard most doubts about is the Moderna Pfizer.
I mean, I think it probably needs to be clarified. Care homes will be doing very well in this particular outbreak this winter. Obviously, yes. Back in March and April, they weren't doing so well because they weren't given the support that they needed in order to do that there. So again, this is really the second time that the care home managers have been is betrayed too strong a word?
No, I don't think it is, because this is where we can be fully supportive of people in the care sector. Most of them, the overwhelming number, are desperately trying to do their best to protect the very vulnerable elderly people that they've got, and they've been successful in this time round. The vaccines have come in, and as you're hearing, something extraordinary has happened. Now the government should be investigating what has happened. The local authority health teams, Public Health England, should be investigating what is happening, but they're not. They're simply pumping more and more vaccines in.
Well, just before you move on, that was a 5-minute clip, Brian. There's actually 15 minutes in total.
Yes.
And we're going to put that out later on this afternoon.
Yes, we will. And I'm going to encourage people to actually listen to the full disclosure. People are taking huge risks personally in order to get this information out. We are delighted that people have the confidence to come to the UK column to get this information out. But as you will hear in the full clip, the risks to anybody daring to challenge the government's policy is extremely great. Now, let's put on screen just some of the comments. These are qualified people talking through on social media what's been happening, and these are people talking to each other from across the country. We've got to be heavily protective of who these people are, but the conversations are real, and you will see how these pieces fit together. So let's have a look. So the start off here is today's a very sad day for us all. 1 year in, and we've had our first outbreak. Residents have had their first vaccinations. So we are hopeful that this will all be okay. Bless you. You've done so well at this time, so sorry. This is because there's some reports coming in. We have exactly the same. No COVID for nearly 12 months. Vaccines on the 14th of January, 1 week later, an outbreak. We have had exactly the same, nothing for 12 months. Vaccinations, 23rd outbreak a week later. Thanks, one of them's my own mum. We've had the same thing too, COVID-free all this time. Vaccinations on the 15th of January, outbreak 6 days later. Such bad luck, but comforting to know we're not the only ones. So sorry to hear that. If we can do anything to help, let me know. Hugs. Big hugs if you need any support. These are good people talking to each other. Exactly the same thing happened to us too. Snap. Vaccines 2 weeks ago, then outbreak. Hopefully we got through it now. Good luck all. Hi, I'm really sorry to hear that. I was in the same situation too. 3/4 of my workforce tested positive, and most of my residents were tested positive. It was a difficult situation. We just came out from the outbreak. I know you will overcome. I feel your pain. I was dealing with the same nightmare yesterday. No COVID all this time, vaccine given, and a few weeks later an outbreak. Honestly, I cried and felt that despite everything we do, it's in our home. Same. We have had the same. We're just coming through it now. and you will take one day at a time. We can only do our best. Let me know if I can help in any way. And this is the final comment in the sequence. I have not created this comment. It is the final comment in this sequence. We've had the same, nothing for 12 months, vaccines, and then an outbreak a week later. I see a pattern emerging. It's bizarre. Mike, what's your reaction to that?
Well, it's pretty clear there is a pattern emerging, but
Yeah.
we've seen that pattern also in the mainstream media headlines. No questions from the mainstream media about it, as usual, David. But the headlines are clear from right across the world. In fact, the vaccine goes in and there's an outbreak commonly afterwards, and that results in deaths. And we should say that if you know, I've been putting every week up, or most weeks I've been putting up not only excess mortality figures, but also the place of that excess mortality. And up until January, up until the beginning of January, the place of that excess mortality has been hospitals and private homes, people's homes, not care homes, people's homes. And it was only in the third week of January or so that we started seeing excess mortality coming out in care homes. Again, we've got to say, David, correlation doesn't equal causation, but these coincidences are building up to a degree that they really can't be ignored.
They can't be ignored. I mean, there's a point at which correlation doesn't equal causation has to be suspended, in which if we're observing a pattern, we have to respond to what we see. It's not real deep science where there's a full explanation as to what's happening. But if you're seeing the same pattern over and over, there must be a response to it. There must be at least a provisional finding. There must be some sort of thought going on. We've seen it in Gibraltar, and the whole island's affected. We've seen it from America. Last week we had the certified nursing assistant from America talking about exactly the same thing with exactly the same vaccine. There's no way the government doesn't know. All the data that's being collected, they must know. Why is Matt Hancock not talking about this? Why is Boris Johnson not talking about this? It's a dereliction of duty just to say nothing and let the vaccine rollout continue with this evidence piling up.
Yeah. And I'll just end that particular little segment again by saying that people taking risks, they're doing the right thing now because they are speaking out, they're saying what they can see going on. But of course, people have got their own families to protect, and they're in a very difficult situation, as you will hear in the full interview with that particular whistleblower. Now, I just want to emphasize that, of course, in the background, the BBC is simply pushing out the propaganda to get elderly people in particular vaccinated. So here's the headline: COVID, when will I get the vaccine? And we've got glowing statistics showing how successfully immensely vulnerable elderly people are now being targeted with this unproven vaccine regime. The BBC, of course, absolutely loves it. But this caught my eye. Do the vaccines work against new variants? Scientists are confident the vaccines will offer good protection against the new variants, although perhaps not quite as much as they did against the original form of the virus. So that's a good woolly statement, but not to worry, because they're going to say, they say, if new versions of the vaccines are needed, developers say it's relatively easy to tweak the current recipes, and we're tweaking them. Are 2 doses needed? All the vaccines have been shown to be safe and effective in trials and highly effective at preventing serious illness and death. How can that be? We got no statistics on it, Mike. No statistics. And if that's not enough, now they're absolutely going for the children. So here's the Daily Mirror: horror of healthy children left paralysed and in pain for months with long COVID. A study from ONS found 15% of 12 to 16-year-olds and 13% of those aged 2 to 11 still have symptoms 5 weeks after a positive COVID test. Experts want a vaccine programme for kids and a new measure in schools when pupils return in March in England and after half term in Scotland and Wales. almost 500,000 UK children are known to have had COVID, suggesting around 74,000 have had long COVID.
Well, that's I'm sorry, I'm going to call that as nonsense and fake news. I would say those are statistics that need significant investigation, so well, maybe I'm just being overly cynical there, but I think we need to look at that in a bit more depth.
I absolutely agree, Mike. And if 74,000 have had long COVID, what are they trying to say? That that's 74,000 children seriously ill? If that is true, where is the data and reports on these 74,000 children?
Yes, now, a second ago you said no data. Well, in fact, we do have data now, Brian. You're going to be very impressed with this data because, of course, the yellow card system is what the MHRA uses to gather statistics on adverse reactions on these vaccines, among other drugs. But up until now, and in fact up until Friday, there were no stats, as you say, available. But the stats were published on Friday. Here's the government page, the MHRA page on the government website, coronavirus vaccine, summary of yellow card reporting. Now, before we look at the actual report, let's just read this interpretation guide that the MHR published and released via Freedom of Information at some point. The key statement is this. To the right of each reaction lists the total number of reports received for a particular reaction and the number of reports where there was a fatal outcome by both single constituent and multi-constituent formulations. Totals of the data displayed in the total unique reports columns. Okay, so what they're saying is that you're going to see, well, let's just put one on screen from this. This is the COVID-19 mRNA Pfizer BioNTech vaccine analysis. It was run on the 31st of January 2021, and this is for from the 9th of December 2020 until the 24th of January 2021. And you can see there that you've got the reaction on the left, you've got a column for total, and you've got a column for the number of those reactions that ended up with a fatality. Yeah. Okay, so we're looking here at heart conditions that are caused by the vaccine, or at least an immediate response to the vaccine, and people had these types of problems. So ventricular arrhythmias and cardiac arrest. Well, there were 7 deaths as a result of that. Arrhythmia supraventricular. Well, there were no deaths from that, but atrial fibrillation, there was a death from that. Let's go on down through some of the other lists. I'm not going to show all of them, but you can see that there are coronary artery disorders. We've got nausea, vomiting. We've got 2 deaths from vomiting. Non-site-specific gastrointestinal hemorrhages. We've got 2 deaths from that. Coronavirus infection. So they are acknowledging that following the vaccination, people ended up with coronavirus infections. That's what they're saying. And they were saying that there were 217 COVID-19 adverse reactions, and 10 people died as a result of that. They were saying that there were 2 cases of COVID-19 pneumonia, and 1 person died as a result of that. And so we go on through the list: lower respiratory tract, diabetes, central nervous system hemorrhages, and so on. Deaths from all these. And so at the very bottom, there are actually many more categories in this. At the very bottom of this, it says that the total reactions for the drug, 49,472, and the total number of fatalities was 107. So that is what they're claiming. However, there is one section that I haven't shown you that, and it's this one. This is for death and sudden death. And this is quite incredible because they say that there was 1 clinical death reported, and that resulted in 1 fatality. And they're saying that there were 7 sudden deaths reported, and that resulted in 7 fatalities. But they're saying that there were 59 deaths reported, and that only resulted in 53 fatalities. So, David, maybe at this point you could explain this for me, please.
No idea, Mike. No idea at all.
Okay.
The figures I got from the Open VAERS database, this would be on COVID vaccines more generally, lists 329 deaths.
Okay, well, look, let's just focus on this for a second. Now, you might say, okay, what we've got here is human error. It's a spreadsheet. Somebody's typed the wrong number in, and that's quite reasonable. That would be true, except for this. If you remember back in November, the MHRA urgently sought an artificial intelligence software tool to process the expected high volume of COVID-19 vaccine adverse drug reactions and ensure that no details from the ADR's reaction text are missed. This is from November last year. For reasons of extreme urgency under Regulation 32(c), related to the release of a COVID-19 vaccine, MHRA have accelerated the sourcing and implementation of a vaccine-specific AI tool. And they said that they justified this not going through the normal procurement procedure by saying it was strictly necessary. It is not possible to retrofit the MHRA's legacy systems to handle the volume of ADRs that will be generated by a COVID-19 vaccine. Therefore, if the MHRA does not implement the AI tool, it will be unable to process the ADRs effectively. And so I'm going to say they've spent whatever number of £1 million it was, I can't remember off the top of my head exactly. They've spent this money on their AI tool. I would have assumed that their AI tool would have automatically reported exactly what the outcomes of the various adverse reactions are. That this therefore could not be human error. It's either an error of their systems, or their systems perhaps have reported something that humans didn't like very much, and there's been some kind of human interjection afterwards. I would like to know the answer. But it seems to me, David, that if you're putting millions of pounds into an AI system to track this stuff and therefore generate reports, that you would have expected no errors in it.
Well, that would seem reasonable, and having simple numbers like that add up would be an absolute minimum, I would have thought.
Let's move on.
I just want to add a bit to that. Supposing you have a multi-million-pound AI system crunching data, when it produces its first report, inevitably that report will go to the desk of an individual, a highly qualified individual. We could say Mr. Chris Whitty, for example, who would look at the paper report in order to check that using his normal brain and cognitive process, if he's still got one, that the AI system was at least producing sensible material. So possibly this document has not been checked by a human being at all. It's been pushed out without any form of medical expert casting their eye over it. And that means that any and all data that's being produced by the government via AI systems could be completely fallacious. We've no way of knowing.
No way of knowing, indeed. So where does that take us?
Well, I think we should just put these statistics on the screen, sent through to me by a retired GP. So we're going to say thank you very much for this. Mike, you've covered a lot of this in graphs, but it's ONS putting out deaths on an annual basis in a very simple form. So we start off with 1990 and we're looking at 564,846 deaths. And if we come to 2020, when we're suffering from huge problems with COVID, we're looking at 561,529, or if we look at the year 2019 deaths, 530,841. What I'm trying to say is if you look through the years from 1990 to 2020, there is no major change in the annual death statistics, and yet the government would have us believe we're in a pandemic.
David, you mentioned the VAERS statistics. Just tell everybody what Open VAERS is.
Yeah, this is an access site giving a summary of information and allowing access into the VAERS database, which is a passive reporting system. So it relies on doctors across the world seeing that there's an adverse reaction, making the connection and reporting. It captures, it's typically believed maybe 1%, but certainly a small portion of the full number of adverse reactions. But it's a very good system, and it gives early warning. Early warning with problems with drugs has been achieved with very much smaller numbers of deaths than this. This has shown 329 deaths, 722 hospitalizations, 2,073 requirements for urgent care, 102 cases of Bell's palsy, 126 of anaphylaxis. These are worrying figures. We should be having people like Chris Whitty, like Matt Hancock, commenting on this. This is information people need to know. People need to make an informed consent about whether they're going to receive the vaccine or not. Simply concealing information from them, simply not talking about it, is not good enough.
Well, some countries are talking about it. This is Pakistan press, and the headline is Pakistan minister says, get vaccinated at own risk as COVID-19 vaccine causes deaths in some countries.
Yes, this shows you that it's occasional. The people in authority in one or two countries across the world are looking at this. They're looking at the data coming out of the Western countries, and they are alerting their people to the risk. So this is Health Minister from the Punjab, Yasmin Rashid, and she said that people should get vaccinated at their own risk, and she claimed that the vaccine had caused deaths in some countries. She is quite right in this. It absolutely has. It's recorded in the VAERS database, amongst other places. Now, why is that not being reported in the UK press? Why is the UK media not asking our ministers whether they should be saying similar things? Is it a pomposity? Is it, well, it's only Pakistan? Does this woman care less about her people than our politicians? I don't think so. Are the medical authorities in Pakistan less able than the medical authorities here? I don't see any evidence for that. So why is this not news? It's very puzzling.
Here we've got a headline from The Defender saying Pfizer COVID vaccine trial shows alarming evidence of pathogenic priming in older adults. What is pathogenic priming?
Well, this is where the vaccine is administered, and there's a very good immune response. There's lots of T cells, there's lots of antibodies. There's an excellent immune response, so the vaccine has been successful, it appears. But then when the body is then challenged with the natural virus, then there's an excessive immune response that causes huge problems with lungs, with breathing, and it can be fatal. So that it's enhancing not the immune system, it's more like disease enhancement. It makes people much more vulnerable to the natural wild disease than they would be if they'd never been vaccinated at all. Many thanks to Vernon Coleman, the old man in the chair, for highlighting in one of his videos this very issue. This is an article written by James Lyons Wheeler, PhD, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. An excellent article and well worth a look, and well worth asking questions of our political overlords as to whether this has been properly investigated. Because remember, everything's been rushed forward. We've missteps in the normal processes of safety assessment. Is this okay? We need to be aware of this as an issue and watching very carefully for it.
Yes, indeed. Okay, well, if you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. And there are options to help us out there. That would be very much appreciated. And also do please share anything that we push out on the usual channels. Well, David, we've got two articles to show here. First of all, you found an article that Robert Greene had written about Leslie Evans. Now, we're going to be talking about the SNP situation a little bit more towards the end of the programme, but interesting that you came across this from your archives.
Yes, I was looking through an old email account and I found this article that Robert had written just before he was taken ill, and I'd forgotten we even had it, and it's phenomenal. It's very, very relevant to today. It shows he had a very good assessment of the nature of the people involved. He was writing this in 2018 and was well ahead of his time. So it was a real pleasure to put out a joint article with Robert and publish posthumously what he had said. The questions he raises about Leslie Evans, about Dame Elise Angelini, and about corruption in the Scottish system, the Scottish state, in Scottish public life, are more relevant today than ever before and are coming out into the mainstream today, whereas when Robert was calling out, he was almost a lone voice.
Yes, and another, well, a discussion with Brian, actually, and this is under the heading Progressive Collapse.
This is a discussion of what's happening in the SNP and more generally what's happening in our politics, what's happening to the Western democracies. I encourage people to look this out. We discuss just why the SNP, riding high in the polls, apparently successful, is falling apart with internal division and internal civil war.
Now, here's a question. It's a headline in the Mail, but I'm quite sure they don't answer it. Why are COVID cases plummeting? New infections have fallen 45% in the US and 30% globally in the past 3 weeks. But experts say the vaccine is not the main driver because only 8% of Americans and 13% of people worldwide have received the first dose. And if you've got any memory, you'll remember that we were told the first dose won't do very much for you. You've got to wait for your second dose. So, David, what is going on here?
What indeed? There is no answer, but this is another excellent question, one we need to be asking our wise overlords. I would say that if what we're seeing is normal seasonal flu being interpreted as much more threatening, being weaponized through the media, and being giving a narrative that it doesn't really warrant, is this not what we would see? We would see a wave of infection dying away and not very much happening, and not any correlation to any part of the lockdown policy, any part of the vaccination policy, nothing. There's a complete mismatch between the evidence and the governmental policy. In other words, we're not being driven by the science, we're being driven by dogma.
That is very, very true. But in Northern Ireland, of course, this is having a pretty major impact. So this has been tweeted out by Philip Watson. This can't be retweeted enough, he says. Northern Ireland's health minister. So the BBC asked Northern Ireland's health minister, so you're saying tonight that a COVID patient won't be turned away, but the result of that decision is that a cancer patient may die. And Ms. Swan saying, yeah, that's the black and white as it is. That's as black and white as it is. That's quite a staggering statement for a health minister to make.
Yeah, the person on the tweet is actually the BBC journalist. It's Robin Swan, who is a Ulster Unionist party politician and Minister for Health in Northern Ireland, and he's being honest. I mean, it's a stark message. It's a horrible message, but goodness sake, at least he's telling the truth. They're turning away cancer patients. Far better to be at least honest, because then we can make we can have a discussion. We can have a different policy, perhaps. They're turning away cancer patients, and people will die because of the COVID-19 policy. At least he is being frank with the people.
That is true. Now, look, the excuse that's being used for people dying, even though they've been vaccinated, is that the new variants aren't quite as are more powerful, and that the vaccines aren't quite as effective with them. So I just thought we'd just have a look at the new variants. Here is the Public Health Matters section of the UK government website. What do we know about the new COVID-19 variants? And let's just have a look at this. Well, first of all, what do we know about the variant first identified in the UK? So we know that we've got a variant identified in the UK. Then it goes on to say, what do we know about the variant first identified in South Africa? So we know that we've got a variant identified in South Africa. And then it goes on to say, what about the variants emerging from Brazil? So we've got variants emerging from Brazil, South Africa, and the UK. Okay, let's look at this then. This is a document pushed out a couple of days ago by AstraZeneca entitled COVID-19 Vaccine. AstraZeneca confirms 100% protection against severe disease, hospitalization and death in the primary analysis of phase 3 trials. So their phase 3 trials are running. And where are they running? The primary analysis for efficacy was based on 17,177 participants, accruing 322 symptomatic cases from the phase 3 UK, Brazil and South Africa trials led by Oxford University and AstraZeneca. And David, I know that we have said that correlation does not equal causation, but here again we have another coincidence. And I'm not making any statement as to say that that's what is going on, but this is another coincidence. And I would like somebody to please provide me with some evidence which demonstrates that the variants from the UK, South Africa, and Brazil are not in any way linked to this trial.
That's remarkable. That's a 1 in a million chance that you would get three, roughly, that you would pick 3 random countries and hit those 3 countries that you used for the trial. That's quite remarkable. Yeah, that would be that demands an answer too.
It absolutely demands an answer. I'm going to say thank you to John for pushing that through to me, because we hadn't seen that, and that was very useful. Now let's have a look at this. This is the Telegraph. Oh, sorry, this is the Telegraph today, and their headline is "Employers could insist all staff get vaccinated under health and safety law." And what are they saying? They're saying that basically the government is going to rely on health and safety law for requiring people to be vaccinated, and for the employers to get away with it. Well, let's just remember what we reported last week from People Management. Can employers force staff to have the COVID vaccine? And their response was, in short, no. In theory, there is a thorough medical examinations. If there is a thorough medical examinations clause in a contract of employment, it could be relied upon. However, this would still be fraught with risk, and freely given consent is required for any medical intervention. If employers are to try to force their employees to be vaccinated, not only could it give rise to human rights concerns, but there could also be criminal implications. Forcing anyone to receive a vaccine injection under duress under UK law would constitute an unlawful injury. A vaccination requires an individual's informed and voluntary consent. And they also said if an employee's refusal to be vaccinated is down to a disability / protected religious / philosophical belief, and results in disciplinary action from their employer, they may be able to issue a direct or indirect discrimination claim and claim constructive unfair dismissal if they resign in protest. So that was what we reported last week. But the Telegraph is as reporting that the reliance is going to be on health and safety legislation. Whitehall sources believe that companies who adopt a jab for a job stance are protected by current health and safety laws, which require workers to protect not only themselves, but also colleagues from harm. One government source said if someone is working in an environment where people haven't been vaccinated, it becomes a public health risk. I would like somebody to explain to me how that is. If someone is working in an environment where people haven't been vaccinated, but they have been vaccinated, what possible risk are the unvaccinated to the vaccinated if the vaccine works? I don't know if you've got a view on that, David.
It takes us into areas where there's no soundness at all. The government in their own literature are saying it's too early to tell if having the vaccine actually reduces your risk of carrying and transmitting the disease. They know nothing. So a statement like that is bizarre. Very interesting they're using health and safety law. Maybe we can get a chance to explore that in extra time. Health and safety law is the area where you're not innocent until proven guilty. You're guilty until proven innocent.
Let's move quickly on then to Devi Sridhar, the wonderful expert that the Scottish Government relies on in these matters, and there's Lockdown Skeptics. Preliminary materials for a theory of Devi Sridhar. Do we have a theory of Devi?
Oh, they do. This is a fantastic little article written by Sinead Murphy, who's a lecturer in philosophy at, I think, Newcastle University. I encourage people to look this out. An example of the alternative media now being far more readable and far more interesting than the broadsheet media. So Devi Sridhar, who decides essentially what happens in Scotland, because Nicola Sturgeon won't do a thing without Devi never mind. Devi tweeted out that after an appearance on television, Devi tweeted out, "I feel like I make myself unpopular by looking ahead 6 to 12 months and sketching out how things could evolve. Best to worst case. So we can work towards best case. This is public health. We try to avert future crises by anticipating and preventing them. Not the most fun at parties, I know." So this bit of banality was tweeted out by Devi. Now, lockdown skeptics here have decided, well, this is a very telling and interesting tweet. Let's see if we can sort out what's happening. Now, I've picked out a couple of comments to make. They start off, the defining characteristic that that makes populations of 21st century democracy so ripe for control. So this is what they're talking about, is the infantilization of the population. The fact that we're being driven by emotion, not analysis. So they comment here, Devi's tweet is a perfect example of the young girl syndrome. It's worth taking time to pick it over. The tweet begins, I feel like, right? And they note that it doesn't say that I think that. It's I feel. So feelings have replaced thought. And they comment that on and on it goes, pushing of life ahead of us is a carrot. Sorry, the second comment that says, I feel like, she then goes and she looks ahead 6 to 12 months. And the article comments, on and on it goes, this pushing of life ahead of us, a carrot that is always about to be eaten, subjected the supposedly educated populations of supposedly advanced societies to just that tomorrow deferral, with which we often placate the unreasonable demands of spoilt children. You can have it next week, next month, next year, anything to keep them happy. They finally, towards the end of the article, they comment, the tweet's worst was saved to last. The playful concession that concerns for public health is not the most fun at parties I know. When once we allow to pass unchallenged the throwaway dismissal of everything, I do beg your pardon. I haven't done that for a long time. Once we allow to pass unchallenged this throwaway dismissal of everything that is now expected to surrender to public health as fun at parties, we lose this fight. When all that has been taken from us, the friendship, the family, the festivals, the education, the care, the touch of human hands, when all of this may be summarized as fun at parties, we lose the fight. When all that has been imposed on us, the anxiety, the depression, the abuse, the penury, the hunger, the sickness, and yes, the death, is whitewashed as fun at parties, we lose the fight. We must keep thinking. We must not bow to feeling. We must reclaim the present and not be put off until Easter. We must remember that some things are always and absolutely off the table. A beautiful piece of writing, a very important piece of writing. So thank you, Lockdown Skeptics, for that.
To make people fearful and stressed and anxious, and utterly brilliant to see new media, let's call it the new media, coming in and taking apart that language and describing it for what it is. So I think this is a very important step, that people are now looking at what's being said and actually taking it back to its component pieces to understand what's really going on. I hope I've explained that in the right language. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Let's move on to censorship then. And this was in the I newspaper today. Freedom of Information Act. Michael Gove's Cabinet Office cover-up claims show transparency more important than ever. Now, what's this about? Well, they're calling it the art of darkness. We'll come on to that in a second. They're saying a secretive unit of officials working inside Michael Gove's Cabinet Office stands accused of sinister cover-up tactics that are undermining transparent government in the midst of a pandemic, known as the Clearinghouse. Well, let's just have a look at where this originally came from. It came from Open Democracy. They published a report called Art of Darkness, How the Government is Undermining Freedom of Information. It's by Lucas Amin. Do go and find this. It's a very interesting report. And let's just get a couple of quotes out of this. The Cabinet Office's influence on freedom of information does not stop at the Information Commissioner's Office. So they've gone through how the Cabinet Office is influencing the Information Commissioner's Office. The Cabinet Office, they say, is also in charge of the Clearinghouse, a small unit that monitors inbound sensitive requests across Whitehall and coordinates the responses of multiple departments. It goes on to say this report reveals, that's the Art of Darkness report, reveals the inner workings of the Clearinghouse for the first time. Freedom of information and subject access requests by Open Democracy reveal that the Clearinghouse shares with a range of Whitehall departments a daily update containing the names of journalists and campaigners, the requests they've submitted, and advice on how referring departments should respond. So the Cabinet Office, therefore, taking absolute control of the narrative, making sure that right across government, freedom of information replies are responded to in the correct way. I just thought we would have a look at the government's censorship network and how that stands. Therefore, at the moment, we have the National Security Council and the Cabinet Office. And on the National Security Council side, we've obviously got GCHQ, Security Services, Secret Intelligence Service, and the Joint Biosecurity Centre. And on the right-hand side, under the Cabinet Office, we have the Rapid Response Unit. Its role is looking at Twitter and Facebook and analysing that and identifying people and also responding to tweets and so on. So that's all about analytics. The National Security Communications Team, 77th Brigade and the 13 Signals sort of do the same sort of thing. The Cabinet Office and ultimate control of those. And also the Department of Culture, Media and Digital Culture, Media and Sport Fake News Unit doing the same. We can now add the FOI Clearinghouse onto that. This is part of this thing. So the question is, who is in charge of this little network? Well, let's just have a look. Because the man in charge of the Cabinet Office is Simon Case. He is the main government or the main civil service mandarin in charge of this. And on his shoulder is Michael Gove, peeking out from the background there, Brian. But this is a nice little network that they have built for themselves in order to control narratives. They're not doing a very good job as far as I can see. But nonetheless, thousands of people employed in this, tens of thousands of people employed in this, and we see the results of it in comment sections, we see the results of it on Twitter, and we see the results of it in people being deplatformed for speaking out.
But the bit that stands out for me, Mike, is that you have got the British military now integrated with central government via the Cabinet Office, not spying on foreign and potentially hostile nation states overseas, but spying on the British public. So what we're looking at is the mechanics of a dictatorship. This is a coup has taken place because this is clearly not a democracy and not the democratic country that we used to live in.
Absolutely. So, David, let's just briefly move on to this. Last week, you showed a little bit of video of a lady in her shop. She had kept her shop open and she was engaging with the police in Edinburgh. It was quite a spectacular little clip, but we now know the name of the shop.
Yes, it's Nini Scott's shop in the Royal Mile in the Canongate in Edinburgh. It's a gift shop, and this is the report in Edinburgh Live, who report that police confirmed that a 37-year-old man was arrested and charged, and a 29-year-old man was issued with a fixed penalty notice at the premises. So that was the members of the public who were supporting Nini Scott in her position with the police. They were acted on by the police. Now the fine people of Edinburgh, well, they're voting on this matter because they've seen the video, and Edinburgh and further afield in Scotland here, the public response has been to thank this lady for the stand she's taken and to send her money to help keep her shop open and keep body and soul together. So a lot of the UK column viewers were asking how they could support the shopkeeper. Well, here's Nini Scott's shop. That telephone number, if you phone that, she'll be able to take orders over the phone. The people at Scottish Freedom Forum have volunteered, or two of them have volunteered to help this shopkeeper set up an e-commerce site. When we get details of that, we'll pass that on to make it easier to buy things from her. But in the meantime, by post and by telephone, you should be able to support Nini's shop and her stance against tyranny. The tyranny, incidentally, said to her that they were going to report her to the licensing board. Her shop sells liquor. They were going to report her to the licensing board because she had been hostile and abusive. I would say to Police Scotland that that was not hostile and abusive. You misidentified it because you're so unfamiliar with it. What this lady was being was magnificent. And if only Police Scotland knew how to be magnificent, we would have a better world. The last clip there shows some of the comments on TripAdvisor left by people who've been in the shop, talking about how warm and friendly the lady is. I spoke to her today myself, and I can confirm that she is a wonderful lady, and I hope to be in her shop very soon. And if I am, I'll try and get some video.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Yes.
Excellent. Well done, her.
Right, are we going to, David, we've got a lot to do this afternoon. Are we going to go through the next two items or one item very quickly? And
let's go through just before we leave. This is a few Scottish items that are timely, so it's worth getting them out on the main news. This is the Sun reporting it was a fit-up. Ex-Rangers administrator hands over a dossier claiming he was fitted up by Police Scotland and the Crown Office, and the evidence was tampered with. He also says that witnesses were threatened. Now, I would point out that he's calling for the perpetrators of this abuse to be investigated, and if the evidence is there, tried for crimes. Now, in Scotland, we have only one police force, it is claimed by Police Scotland, that have investigatory powers, and that's Police Scotland. And of course, they are guilty in this themselves. And we have only one prosecutor with prosecutorial powers, and that's the Crown Office, and they are most certainly guilty because they've essentially admitted it, that they had a malicious prosecution of these two men. So how are we going to investigate and how are we going to prosecute when the very people charged with investigating and prosecuting are themselves the ones who are going to be on trial?
Good question. And what's, just quickly, what is the final or the latest on the Joanna Cherry Scottish National Party situation?
A few points here. Here's Joanna Cherry tweeting out, she's retweeting Alex Salmon's tweet of the Scotland rugby team lifting the Calcutta Cup at Twickenham for the first time in 38 years. The fact that she has liked a tweet from Alex Salmond is, I think, a hanging offence now in the SNP, so that's a declaration of war. This is a quote from the SNP MP's internal WhatsApp group at Westminster. Joanna Cherry said, "The man who sent me a violent rape threat tonight is an associate of men in this group." That is, associate of male MPs, SNP MPs. "So I will be leaving it. Thanks to all of you who have been in touch." So that shows you how bitter that fight is becoming. She also said, with I would say, a hint of accuracy, she accused the SNP of Stalinist revisionism, as her sacking didn't actually mention her or her achievements or even her presence or even her name, which was quite something. And the problems in the SNP go from bad to worse. We've had Neil Hanvey was appointed last week to the front bench, and after 4 days, Neil Hanvey was sacked from the front bench because he had supported a crowdfunder to raise money to take forward a defamation claim against another SNP MP. One we talked about, Brian, the other day, Kirsty Blackman, the SNP MP for Aberdeen. So the war goes on. There'll be more on that story later.
Okay, well, we're going to end then with this, the Scottish variant, since we're talking about variants. I think that's quite apt, David.
I like that. The Scottish variant of COVID is tartan and has many drones pointing in many different angles, and it's based on the bagpipe. And there you go. Watch out for that one. I'm sure it might be quite nasty.
At least you can hear that one coming. If there's to be any sense of infection, you might actually hear it. So that's a good thing.
Yes. Now, to answer the question in the chat box, we will be doing an extra. We'll be back on the live stream about 10 minutes after the end of the programme.
Yeah, indeed. David, how can we sum up very quickly? We've got a nation still in a state of curfew. We've got a nation which is running a surveillance system against its own citizens. We've got north of the border total breakdown in government and no law and order because there's no separation of the powers. It seems to me that these United Kingdoms are being attacked from the inside. Is that too strong?
we are not finding any way of getting questions answered. We're not finding any rationality. It's all the emotion that Devi Sridhar bases her decision making on. It's all of the illogicality. It's all of the short-termism, and there is no mature reflection. There's no soundness in the system now. We need to start getting some soundness back. It starts with the ability to talk, which leads on to the ability to think.
Okay, and I can't resist this, David, because of a comment in the chat box. Your task is to get on to the lady in that excellent shop up in Edinburgh, to give her the diagram of the Scottish variant, suggest that she produces it as a keychain and fob, and I think they will sell like hotcakes.
Yes.
We'll see if that can be arranged. Thank you.
Okay. Thank everybody for joining us, and especially to our overseas viewers. We know you're there, and thank you for coming all the way to watch and listen to the UK Column News today. That's it for the moment. We'll be back shortly with our extra. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.